I wanted to explore. I remember when I came to see you at Clinton House many years ago when I was writing a book. And I remember that as we were walking out, we looked at some of your artwork, and you said to me at the time that you were really pleased you'd invested in art, and you even quipped that I think you earned more out of art than driving at the time. But I just wanted to explore that side of you a little bit, investing in things that are a little bit outside your obvious comfort zone, let's say.
Yeah. Well, my mother went to the Glasgow Art School as part of her education. She was the daughter of a farmer in a place called Eaglesham, out of about 20 or 30 miles outside of Glasgow. And she was a good artist. In fact, I've got one of her paintings hanging in Clayton House. For whatever reason, I took an interest, not in the early days, because A, I had no money, and B, I was kind of awfully busy doing other things. But for a good number of years now, I've collected art, both here in Switzerland and in the UK. And I've got some fine paintings. I specialised for most of the early start of my interest in the Scottish painters. There was a very good run of Scottish artists for a while, and Cadell and Peploe and the four colorists they were called. But then I got a wonderful painting of Sir Walter Scott, which is a great painting that I absolutely adore. So I've collected now, both in the UK and over here, just exactly what I want. There's nothing to do with names. I don't have a Picasso. Well, I've actually got a Picasso of mother and child, but it's with a 50 print version, only 50 prints, but it's in pencil. But it's a beautiful piece.
Yes.
And I've got a very good Yves Klein, and he's the man who would paint girls in blue and then put them onto canvas.
Yes, I know.
And
wonderful.
That's his art. Yeah. And that I bought very early on, way back in 1968. So I still take an interest. I very much enjoy it. It's because look, here we've got motor racing because Ken Tyrrell gave me that one when I won the British and European Formula 3 championship, my first year with him. He gave me that for a Christmas present. But the rest that are around here are all Formula 1 because this is my study.
Yes.
But art is a very enjoyable thing to have, and I think it teaches you a lot. It gives you a better appreciation of life, and because of that, you meet people who are enormously interesting, and sometimes some of the most powerful and richest people in the world, because they have been able to go the full Monty, so to speak.
Yes.
So I have to say it's one of the nicest things I've been able to enjoy about my life in general.
And I also remember when I came to see you, you pointed out a couple of Beatles memorabilia that you had around the house in the UK. This is, and following on from that, I just wanted to ask you, when you were racing, it was an extraordinary moment of racing, of music, of change of lifestyle. Were you aware at the time, in the middle of all this, that things were changing quite a lot in society?
Yes, I think I was very lucky, and I have been very lucky. First of all, I'm still alive. And during the period of my career as a driver, all of my friends are dead. I have no friends who, well, Helen counted it up, 57 people. All died who had either stayed with us, traveled with us, were best friends with us, whether it was, of course, Jimmy Clark or Jochen Rindt or Piers Courage or Francois Sever or all the others that have died. So it was a strange time. And emotionally, oddly enough, for some reason, I was able to deal with it, where today I don't deal with it well. And it still upsets me. a lot. And that's, I think, partly growing old, but partially recognizing what I've lost and who's not there, etc. But on the other hand, it was the swinging 60s and 70s, which were extraordinary periods of history with regards to quality of life, to do with fashion, to do with music, to do with extraordinary people. You know, one of the privileges that I've, whatever you could say, inherited, has been the number of people who have turned out to be exceptional folk.
Yes.
Or even were then. I mean, our royal family, for example, I've been privileged to get a knighthood, but I've been privileged obviously because of my shooting, because shooting came before racing. And because I was a shooter, trap shooting to begin with, and then of course pheasants and partridge and grouse and so forth, I was invited by all the nicest people in the United Kingdom and sometime abroad, Germany or anywhere, Italy too. And these were extraordinary people. Mr. Beretta, for example, the man who makes the Beretta guns, invited me to shoot and then gave me, for winning the world championship the first time, a Beretta gun. And from that friendship, I've got that friendship of now his sons. And his number one son's the number one man in Beretta, but we still communicate and talk to each other. The same applies to an awful lot of other folk. And that's one of the big privileges I think the 60s and 70s had. You know, I remember Nearchus arriving at the Monaco Grand Prix. And of course, Atlantis is the name of his great big
yacht.
Ship. It's not a yacht.
You're right.
and he came up and he knew who I was. And he said, oh, I want to see your car. Take me to see your car. So I go in the pit. You know, in those days, there was no barrier between the pits and the racetrack. I mean, people don't understand that now. So anyway, I take him along there and he looks at the car and he said, I want to sit in the car. And he's about my height, he was. So I said, okay, I'll talk to Ken. I'm sure he'll be happy. Yeah, absolutely. You sit in the car. Then he says, I want to start it up. And Ken's saying, well, I mean, this is just before practice. Anyway, he lets him start it up and he's in there with boom, boom, boom. I mean, really screaming it up. And here was one of the richest men in the world at that time, probably one of the two richest men in the world at that time. So he got out of the car and he said, oh, Jackie, as soon as this practice is over, I'm going to stay in your pit to see all of this. I want you to come and have a drink in Atlantis with me. And I went there to this beautiful big ship. And he takes me right round the ship. And by that time, I had taken an interest in art. Every guest suite had a masterpiece in it.
Wow, really?
I mean, Monet's and all that. And then we're walking down a great big spiral staircase. And he looks and he says, oh, and here's a great big picture as tall as this room. And it's Presley by Andy Warhol.
Wow.
But he says, and look at this. This is Wesley Presley, he said. That's what he genuinely thought the name was. He didn't know any more than that. So, and that friendship continued. He came to my house for dinner to celebrate, I think it was his 70th birthday at home with a whole lot of his friends. But his friends became my friends. Yes. But King Hussein of Jordan, for example, was a great motor racing enthusiast, and Formula One he loved. And I took him to Formula One races. I had him drive the Ford Formula One, the Stewart Ford car later on. But I mean, there was the most impressive man I've ever met in my life.
Really?
The Queen is by far the most impressive woman I've ever met in my life. But King Hussein of Jordan was magical. A man of enormous talent and a huge head, by the way, an enormous head. I had to have Bell make a head for him.
Really? A helmet.
Yeah, because, and I got him into the what was it? I took him to Alton Park and had him drive all of our cars and had him race Paul in Formula 3 car around the circuit and things like that. And then who was it that Michael Schumacher won the world championship with? The Benetton.
Benetton, yes.
I got Luciano to agree to get the Benetton up, and we took him over to the biggest airfield in Britain, which was only used in the case of war when two Concords could fly side by side and take off. It was huge, very long and very wide.
Yeah.
And I let him drive. We got him to drive the Formula One car up and down. And I said, 3 laps will be fine, I think, because King of Greece was there as well, and so was the Queen of Jordan. And of course, he got into the car, and I had him in overalls and everything. We couldn't get him out of the car. He kept going up to one end and back down to the other, and we had cars at the far end, at both ends, to make sure at that speed that he could stop, because not used to. He was doing more than 200 miles an hour in the turbocharged Benetton. And the Queen's saying, the Queen of Jordan's saying to me, Jackie, you've got to put a stop to this. It's got to be stopped. So I'm going out saying, come on in with a thing and an arrow, still going. And finally he ran out of petrol. That was the only reason to stop. So friendships like that, you can't buy. No. And it only happened because I was a racing driver at the time when, whether it was Monarchs or, Prince Albert was maybe 11 years of age when I was taking around the paddock at 11 o'clock at night to see the cars getting prepared. It was a different world altogether. The intimacy of everybody, the friendships, whether it was Graham or Jimmy or Mike Spence or my own teammates. I mean, they were, and of course all of them died, but it was colorful, it was glamorous, it was exciting. It had Harnaby Street, the women were hardly dressed. I tell everybody we were in the swinging 60s and 70s when motor racing was dangerous and sex was safe. But it was like a world apart. And fortunately for me, I stayed in the sport, having large multinational corporation, whether it was a Ford Motor Company, I think for 40 years, Goodyear for 30 years, Rolex for 53 years and still going. Moet and Chandon, because I was the first to spray champagne in Formula One. And Fred Chandon was there, and he put me under contract, and I'm still under contract 63 years later.
Really?
So it's been a great sort of rocket ship, but at a time when I think relationships of that kind were capable of happening, because somehow or other the spirit of the 60s and 70s gave access to people that you wouldn't normally get to be with. And because I did a lot of television in America for ABC's Wide World, and that was 19 years of doing that. You met, you were doing to the Olympics. I was doing commentary in the Olympics, Winter Olympics and Summer Olympics. And I was meeting, Charlie's Angels and all the fancy folk. And I was living in New York as well as Hawaii, as well as Scotland to begin with. And then it became impossible for this travel schedule, because in those days there were no international flights out of Glasgow, for example. So I had to move down, and I moved right to Switzerland, actually, rather than just going to England, because Jim Clark went to the Bahamas. So if Jim Clark went abroad, Jackie Stewart had to go abroad.
You were trailblazing on that too. Um, Jackie, to a certain extent, you answered my question, and it was very interesting to hear you talk about this. But what do you think? What has racing taught you? Is it focus? Is it determination? Is it what did you have already that you sharpened up?
Well, I think it started well because I had another sport. Because before I was a racing driver, I was a clay pigeon shooter, not very glamorous, but I shot for Scotland and I shot for Great Britain. So therefore, I went around the world and I met an awful lot of people. And if you're a competitor at the high level, you meet an awful lot of folk and you learn how to communicate better. And when I got to motor racing, it was with a courier course and a nice man called Barry Feiler, who let me drive his AC Bristol and his Marcus and so forth. But these were personal friendships. And when I then went to a courier course, my brother had driven for a courier course. So I had, as a wee boy of 14, had been with David Murray and Wilkie Wilkinson, who was the chief mechanic. And then there I was actually driving in a courier course car at the beginning of my racing career before Ken Tyrrell picked me up. And I learned a lot about how to live with people, not just the fancy folk, but because I was a mechanic in a garage. I left school at 15 with no education because I'm a dyslexic. I cannot read or write now. I don't know the words of the national anthem or the Lord's Prayer. I don't have it here, but I've got a telephone that's that size. I can't use an iPad or an iPhone. I just can't do it. And I'm an extreme dyslexic.
Yes.
And so therefore, under these circumstances, I think you try harder to get with people and to get on with people, because at school you're told you're dumb, you're stupid, and you're thick, and you're being given a very bad start to your life. From, in my case, let's say I was told I was dyslexic, I think when I was 9 years of age, and I had to stay in school until I was nearly 15. And you're the dummy in the class. Well, there was more than me because there were big classes, but it was, you therefore learn how to communicate better with people. And I don't know what it is, but a hell of a lot of people are dyslexic because you can't think like the clever folk. You think outside the box all the time. And my whole life's been built like that. All the major multinational corporations that I have been part of, I've brought a different story to them than they would be getting under the normal circumstance. And because I was a world champion racing driver, and because I had won the European, Mediterranean, and all these championships of shooting, I met with and learned manners as well as communication skills, because I was always dealing with cleverer folk than me. So therefore, I was learning so much from some of the best minds in the world in the end. And I think that had a lot to do with my commercial life, because when I stopped with Ken, I was immediately retained by Ford Motor Company for 40 years. And I knew Henry Ford, and I knew Edsel was one of my best friends, and I was a bride, anyway, these relationships have still continued. Yes. And the King Hussein of Jordan, that type of relationship. Yes. And that has a domino effect. So it's not that you're trying to be friends with these people, or it's just the sport allows you, but you've got to allow them to get as much out of it as you are getting out of it, the relationship or the privilege, if you like. So I think sport from that point of view is a terrific man or woman maker.
Yeah.
If you're a good sportswoman or a sportsman, you are getting opportunities and meeting different people and been given privileges that you would otherwise never get. So sport for me has been the making of Jackie Stewart. There's no question about that. But building relationships from that has been very important. And I still love the mechanics that I have them up. My mechanics from Tyrrell, for example, I have them up every year, at least twice for lunches or dinners and so forth. Keeping relationships are one of the most important things also, because when you become reasonably successful, and if you become world champion, and if you become a more than one world championship, you could get easily very carried away. Sports a good maker and breaker of people.
Yeah.
And if you don't see the downside risks, you can easily get carried away with all the powder puff that goes on by being successful, whether it be a world champion at shooting and in shooting it was a mild thing. Nobody knew about clay pigeon shooting, but in motor racing is a whole different world.
So you manage not to let success get to your head, is what you were just saying there. It's not easy.
Well, no, you can't do that because you're hanging out with people who are a lot cleverer than you are. And that's choosing the right people to be with is very important.
Yeah.
I mean, you see some sports people who have just got a big entourage behind them. And they're all sycophantics.
Yeah, of course.
That's the last thing you want to have. You've got to hang out with the right people, though. And that doesn't mean people with money or fame. The right people. My father told me that. If you fly with the crows are vermin. If you fly with the crows, you're liable to be shot at. If you soar with the eagles, you're above shot.
Fantastic.
Now, there's a whole lot of those things that I could quote to you that have been an important part of my life. And it's not being sycophantic. You can't be like that because people see through that.
Yeah.
You've got to deliver, but you've got to give it as much as you get given.
Yeah.
In fact, you've got to get back more.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people get carried away with their own importance, and that's something you've got to avoid.
Definitely. Jackie, do you still love cars?
I'm still driving, but I've got a driver too. I use a telephone in a car like it's an office for me. So therefore, I have a driver. I take my dogs out for walks, and it's me that's driving. I'm not a long distance driver anymore because I'll be on the phone. The telephone has arrived some years ago, and I had one of the first ones. But now it doesn't matter where I go in the world. I mean, this morning I was in the Olympic the medical center in Geneva doing my physio, but both on the way down to Geneva from where I live, which is about, let's call it 45 minutes, I was on the phone in both directions. So I was being driven. But I have to say I'm not a car man particularly, which surprised most people. But of course, my father was a garage man. He owned a garage, and I was a mechanic in the garage. So I've been surrounded by cars all my life, and I'm fussy about what I have, and I've always been fussy about that. So yes, but I'm not. I've never owned a fancy car. I've never owned a Ferrari or a Lamborghini or a GT40 or anything like that. That's not my scene. I think that was the past.
And what about the whole electrification of cars? What do you think of that? And do you think that in a sports world, F1 and Formula E or something similar will converge or create a new championship environment. Is that the way to go?
Yeah, I think that Formula One is the epitome in the world of motorsport for me. A lot of people would say some of the rallies are and so forth, but I'm not a rally person, so I don't know enough about it. But Formula One, the sophistication of Formula One, the knowledge of Formula One, the skill of problem solving faster than any other business I know, or any other activity for that matter. And I use Formula One, incidentally, as you may know, Helen's got dementia, which is now the biggest killer in the world. More people die of dementia than any other illness. And the latest statistic says that everyone born today, 1 out of 3 is going to have dementia.
Oh, wow.
And there's no cure yet, and there's no preventive medicine. So I'm using Formula One, I'm using McLaren and Red Bull to bring on young PhDs and get them into the McLaren in the factory of Red Bull to see how problem solving's done way ahead. I mean, this present epidemic has accelerated medication faster than anything in the history of the medical sport, medical industry.
Yes.
Because we've had more people are dying, and now that we've got medication that's going to avoid that, hopefully. Now that's happened as it would never have happened for even cancer.
Yeah.
Which is a big killer.
Yeah.
But it takes something unusual to happen, and motorsport is a great example of problem solving and how to get things done in a fast way. And whether it's in safety, which I took a huge interest in, but only because it was ridiculously unsafe.
Yes.
Telegraph poles and trees at the side of the racetrack, and I mean, just ridiculous conditions. So because I was world champion, I could put a lot of pressure on and get support by media. Because people were dying 10 a penny. You'll remember this.
Yes.
In 1968, Jim Clark died on the 7th of April. The next weekend, in the same weekend, Mike Spence died. And the same weekend, the next one was June. Ludovico Scarfiotti died. The next one, the French Grand Prix, was Joe Slesser died. Every single month for 4 consecutive months, a top racing driver in the world died when they should never have died.
No.
And they wouldn't be dying today. Look at what Grosjean came out of.
I know, it's amazing. Yeah.
You know, there's a film you can show to, you know, when you're doing this package. And there's a man that got out of that because the survival cell, which is the cockpit now, the impact area is so safe. Even with flame, he was able to get out.
Yes.
All of these friends of mine who died, and Francois Sever died the day before I was going to retire as a race driver, in an accident that was just ridiculous. The barriers were not good enough, and the impact was too high, and so therefore, motorsport is Formula One motorsport is a great example of getting change rapidly handled and safety radically handled.
Yeah. And do you think that Formula One will struggle with the electrification of cars, both in mobility and in sport?
I think there must be change. There must be progress. Whether it be tires or whether it be engines, there's been great changes. Formula E, for example, have collected a lot of people in the city centres, whether it was Rome or whether it was Buenos Aires or whether it was somewhere else, huge crowds of people. But no sound has been a definite loser on the basis of the perception. So, and I think, for example, women coming into motor racing, I think is a vital thing. I mean, women are playing football, they're playing rugby, they play golf extremely well, you know, championship levels. Why not motor racing? We've been very slow at that. But little girls didn't go karting.
No.
They did other things,
Yeah.
you know. Now they're going to have to go karting if they want to be racing drivers.
Yeah.
Because our current world champion was driving karting at 8 years of age successfully.
Yes.
And every single driver in Formula One today has had to go through karting.
Mm.
And they've therefore been starting at a very young age to get just into a Formula One car. There's hardly anybody ever got in there under 20 years of age.
Mm. Yeah.
So it's a long trip.
Yes.
But I think the world will make their mind up about where they want their sport to be. And if we have to live without sound, we may have to. But it's a big part of today. There's a passion about that.
Yeah.
And you see, you know, I go to all these Grand Prix, men and women, young and old, they want to hear the car start up. You know, the paddock, not the paddock, but the pit lane walk.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, they just go wild and they're just stimulated by it.
Yeah.
So it has a role to play.
Yeah. Well, it's a money can't buy sound, isn't it? Emotion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think my shooting had more to do with any success that I had in anything else. Because when you're shooting, the mental discipline is so high. The moment that you put that cartridge up and the gun ready to shout pull for the trap to go away, if you miss it, you never get it back. So if it's a 100 target event and you miss it, you're only doing 99, and you know there's another 99 to go.
Yeah. Pressure.
So your mind management, I learned from shooting, and the single-mindedness and the preparation and the commitment and the emotional to removing emotion, vital. I won more races in the first 5 laps than almost anybody else in my time, because I learned from shooting that I had to be absolutely neutral. I had to remove emotion. I described it by, if you have a rubber ball and it's overinflated and you try to bounce it along the sidewalk and there'll be cracks or a little one heavier than the other, it's out of control. If you deflate the ball, the more you deflate the ball, the less it's going to run away from you. I was deflated completely by the time I got into the car at the beginning of the Monaco Grand Prix or any other Grand Prix. I had no emotions left. I removed emotion, and shooting taught me that. And that was one of the most important things that I had in my, in my little life.
But Jackie, you were so young.
Huh?
I find it fascinating because nowadays, as you know, lots of top sports people, they use sports psychologists, they use meditation, mindlessness. You know, you were so young, and as you said, you left school at 15, so you had to learn this deflation, as you wonderfully call it, this mind management all by yourself.
Yes, but that's where shooting came, but that's where the other sport came in.
Yeah.
That taught me how to have mind management. And when you get to that level where you're winning multi-world championship, not in my case a world championship, I never won the world championship, but I won the European and Mediterranean, I won the British, the Scottish, the English, the Irish, all these things. And I won them because I didn't miss as many as the others.
Well,
and once you miss it, you never get it back.
Yeah.
I could make a mistake in a racing car and regain it, if not in that lap, within the next 5 laps.
Yeah. Yeah.
In shooting, you lost it and you never got it back. So the discipline I got from shooting and the removal of emotion is vitally important. And that carries right through to business. If you're in a business meeting and you start getting angry, you will say something that you later will wish you had never said.
Yeah, yeah.
And mind management, I learned, I mean, obviously it was for shooting I learned it, and I maybe polished it a little bit within motorsport.
Yeah.
But that's, at least I knew I had to do that to remove emotion. You get excited, you get overly happy, or you get overly sad. It's a bad scene.
Mm.